here for another episode of The Truth About Me. This is episode 27. Jeez, 27 is crazy. Today is Sunday, January 11th. And I do want to apologize. Last week I said it was Sunday the 3rd. And I didn't realize till after the fact. But yeah, I did in fact get the date right. This episode here tonight is going to kind of cover about negotiating. I know I briefly touched on it in a previous episode, but I wanted to kind of, give it its due. So let's get into it. There was a time in my life when I negotiated my needs, my boundaries, and my worth just to keep the peace. And, being able to do that, it's difficult because you put yourself into a position that, here you are trying to be, truthful and explaining, but I'll get more into that as this goes on. But this episode is about what happens when you stop doing that. And, because I'm guilty of being an over-explainer, simply because, I want people to, see where I'm coming from. Now, granted, I know everybody's not going to see things eye to eye with me, and that's fine. We're all entitled to our opinions and our perspectives and all of that, and I get that. But, you can't try to force something upon someone no matter what, whether it's 100% right or it's 100% wrong, right? So even if you are right and you know you're right, you have to just kind of, pull back. So let me kind of show you what negotiating with yourself actually looks like, and so this is something that, you over-explain instead of stating, right? And again, it's something where you kind of have to read the room, read your people, know who you're talking to, and you have to have a certain tone about it, and it's not a tone of arrogance. So kind of keep that in mind as this goes on. Compromising before being asked. Doing stuff of putting yourself into a position that you normally wouldn't do simply because you think you're doing the right thing. Shrinking, to avoid any sort of conflict, whether it's in a romantic relationship or a platonic relationship. I've realized that I've done a lot of shrinking for being a guy my size, But overall, seriously, it's like, it's putting yourself into a very vulnerable position when there doesn't need to be. Accepting inconsistency to maintain connection. That's one thing I learned in this past relationship is there was, as I reflected throughout, there was significant amount of inconsistency, but I overlooked that, and that's something you cannot do. That's a loss of self-respect for you as a person, and you deserve a lot more. Somebody who is going to be consistent and is putting in, the efforts that you are. Again, staying quiet when something doesn't sit right. A lot of people, and that's a childhood thing. If you happen to see something or say something and you got a parent that's, coming down on you, be like, hey, don't say that, don't do this, and that's why, people get quiet when they see something weird or something just doesn't feel right because they don't know how to explain it and articulate it. And, truthfully, I was like that all throughout my, growing up, late teens, 20s, and I really started to come into my own probably mid-30s, after my divorce, where it was, just because you're quiet and something happens doesn't mean it's going to go away. All it does is just fester. And that's something you cannot have. And then just, ultimately justifying behavior that doesn't align, whether it's outbursts, whether it's what other things can I go? I mean, outbursts are kind of the rare one, or you just have to make sure that You're constantly looking at, what it is that you and your romantic partner are about, and if it doesn't align with what you're doing, then there's really no sense in continuing on. Um, so again, a key line for, that previous section is, negotiating yourself doesn't feel like self-betrayal at first. It feels like being understanding. So think of that, right? I mentioned self-respect, but again, it's a form of self-betrayal of yourself. So you are definitely more than that. Like if you are clued in and you know what you want, then guess what? Like you should be able to talk to somebody and state that. And this is uh, why I learned to do it, right? So um, this is going to kind of be about life patterns, how you grew up, your childhood, like your child. It's amazing how much your childhood comes into play and affects how you are even to this day. Because if you don't recognize a problem because it was something that occurred daily in your house, now to you it's perfectly fine, it's normal, right? But to somebody else coming in, they may see that and be like, "Whoa, excuse me, whoa, what was that?" And and that's where you have to have that self-awareness, because not everything that you've learned or done, people are going to understand. So, and it does affect you. And you know and throughout my journey and throughout my growth and throughout my life is I've learned to, I've done things and I've learned from them, whether it's good or bad. So it's again being self-aware. um, you know, so I'm going to touch on, I previously touched on it, but it's growing up environments where emotions weren't prioritized, right? So when you look at the Gen Xers, and even the Boomers, you know, because it's funny because, I talked to my mother about this, and, her family was, they were on the quiet side. They never talked about anything. They didn't really share feelings. And then she spoke about her best friend where they did all of that as a family. So she didn't quite understand it. And how I grew up was similar to how she grew up, which was stuff was very quiet. So for a lot of times, you know, when it comes to emotions, where I've said it previously, I come from a fuck your feelings, you know, era where you weren't allowed to have feelings. They didn't matter. And being a man, you're supposed to suck it up and deal. So, and now in today's society, feelings are everywhere, emotions are everywhere, right? So, when you look at it like that, it's you know, for me, it's easier to sit there and say, hey, I'm feeling this type of way, and seeing what I get for a response, and a truly supportive partner will embrace that and say, hey, listen, you know what, I'm here for you. Um, and then if they don't, then, and if that's a boundary of yours, then guess what? You're never going to get that, no matter what happens. So you really kind of have to evaluate each situation as it comes. Learning that peace mattered more than honesty. And this is kind of a big one, because it again goes to the moments where you are quiet and you think you're keeping the peace, and that's just not true. Learning, um, trying to be honest. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. Um, you know, in some cases, honesty, like I'm a fan of honesty is the best policy, regardless of how you're feeling. So, if you're honest with yourself and you're honest with your partner, then a lot can, occur with that, because you don't have to remember anything because you are being honest. Um, there were things where I believed love required flexibility at my expense, and there was where I would, you know I would buy this, I would buy that, I would go and, finding out that material things, excuse me, material things mattered when essentially they didn't, you know. And as I've gotten, in this last relationship, it wasn't about material things. It was about what you could provide um, inside, and that was something that I grew significantly on because it mattered to my partner at the time. So, um, and then another thing was confusing patience with self abandonment, and there's a lot of people that they 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 can't really grasp that, and they're like, how do I do this, and you know you have to understand that patience is prevalent with everybody, no matter what relationship you're in. Whether you're in a relationship for 3 days or 30 years, you still have to be patient, with your partner. um, so the one thing, a distinction that I want to kind of make is I didn't negotiate myself because I was weak. I did it because I wanted connection. So, again, it's something where you do things for love, or um, the relationship, but then again, it's something that at the end of the day you have a choice, and if you're negotiating with yourself, then you have to ask yourself why. Because you're like, hey, is this going to benefit me later on down the road, right? So here comes the cost of negotiating with yourself, and this is something that you know you don't realize until kind of after the fact. At least for me, anyways. I mean, some people may have the awareness to sit there and say, hey, like this happened in the middle, and I can't do this. But resentment builds quietly. Your identity erodes slowly, and attraction fades. Your self trust weakens. You become emotionally tired, and you start feeling unseen. And with those kind of statements, starting with the resentment, is you don't realize it till the end, because me loving as hard as I do within relationships is, like at the end of it is where that kind of, comes up, because, once I check out of that relationship, or, I'm done with it, then all of the things that I have buried come to the surface. And, there's a period of anger for sure, you know, um, just because like you're trying to understand, and you can't believe you put yourself into that position. So, when you so when the resentment does build, some it may slowly build, but with me it builds and stays and then explodes at the end. So, um, but with that kind of being said, the more I negotiated myself, less of me there was left, because I was literally picking myself apart, because I was trying to do all of these things when I didn't have to. Now comes the turning point of this whole thing. Um, there was, I realized that when I was explaining things, it wasn't getting through, it wasn't working. And, so I had to, pull back, because you can only smash your head against a brick wall so many times that to do that. And if that person isn't accepting what you're saying, then you can't continue to say it. Clarity wasn't being received on my end. I had ambiguity. And that right there is, I wasn't getting anything clear until the end, right? So, don't get me wrong, there were moments where I had clarity, or I thought I had clarity, because those moments were true. But, when I think back towards the end, they weren't, it was just smoke and mirrors. Um, effort wasn't changing outcomes. No matter how much I tried, no matter how much I, um, pushed to keep the relationship going, it wasn't reciprocated. It wasn't, no matter what I did, it wasn't going to change the outcome. And then it came to the fact of my needs weren't being met. I had, I had a girlfriend, but I didn't have a girlfriend. You know what I mean? And it was this game, right? And it was something where I just wanted honesty and clarity. And it took till the end, you know, to finally get that. Now, I didn't get the full closure I would have liked, but in the same token, it's something that I had to accept because it occurred. You know, she was obviously done, and there's nothing that I could have done to change her mind. So, um, and when it came, and even though it's a turning point, it usually happens in the middle. For me, again, it kind of happened at the end because I could see the writing on the walls. But, you know, at that point in time, like, the turning point wasn't anger for me. It was, that became my clarity. And, right at the end, and even though it was very confusing, um, and very abrupt in the sense of it, I still saw it, just because the vibes were off, and the disconnection had occurred. So, but getting back to now, what's stopping negotiation looks like now for me, and you know it's realistically like if you have a good partner, you're not going to have to say things over and over, right? You're going to state your needs once, right? Not repeatedly. And, that's one thing that I'm coming towards. You know, I now watch for behavior instead of words because, again, it's actions more so than words and a lot of capacity is you're going to see patterns that people put together. So you have to be aware of that. Walking away from inconsistency calmly. Like here's the thing: is like if that person's being inconsistent and you've brought it up to them, it's kind of like I don't want to say zero tolerance, and obviously within your relationship you can do what you feel is going to be necessary for you, but when somebody becomes inconsistent and they're showing me and I bring it up and it's still not fixed, guess what? Gotta walk. Because you have to value yourself because that person will never be able to meet you where you need them to meet you. So, trusting, excuse me. So within that, going in, segueing into that, it's choosing your peace over potential. You can't fall in love with the potential of somebody, and I was guilty of it, 100%. I'm gonna deny it. I fell in love with the potential that she had showed me, and come to find out, it was just that potential because she could not move forward. She didn't have the capacity that to accept the things that I was giving her, despite what she said. So, like, understanding that, and you have to choose peace because what's the point of living in chaos? I mean, if you want to live in chaos, hey, that's your prerogative, man. Whatever blows your hair back. But, at the end of the day, you have to choose your own peace. And then again, it's this is kind of like a gut check. It's trusting your discomfort as and using that as information. If something doesn't sit right, something doesn't feel right, then guess what? Something's off, and and you can trust yourself because uh, excuse me. And you can trust yourself because you know how your body works. You know that person. You know what I mean? And if it doesn't feel right, you have to listen to that. It's not lying to you. So, and then ultimately, it's letting silence speak for you. Is is you have to be able to sit back and kind of look at the whole picture, right? And with that being said, it's being able to sit in peace, sit in silence, and let that speak for you. If you've said what you've gone to say, if you've brought something up and you haven't had an answer, you wait for that answer because you've already asked the question. You don't have to sit there and fill the silence with anything else and given options because it just becomes a form of deflection, right? So now I don't negotiate my worth anymore. I just sit back and I continue to observe. So, with that, it's powerful because again, you are setting yourself up for you. You deserve what it is that you're looking for. And, if you have certain boundaries in place, you have to follow them. You cannot sit there and, be like, oh, they're okay, they're okay, they're okay. No, like, you have to be firm with yourself. And that's one thing that I'm becoming more and more comfortable with um, as I move on, but then there comes a fear with, that. And here's the reality is when you do set things up, there is a fear of being alone. There's a fear of being misunderstood. There's a fear of being labeled too much. And there's a fear of losing connection. And that, my friends, is something that you have to learn how to be alone. You have to understand that you will be misunderstood to those who don't know you. Okay? And if you're labeled as too much, hey, that's their issue, not yours, right? And then fear of losing connection. When you're talking about connection, you have to really, kind of get down to the nuts and bolts of it. With is people, if they want to be in your life, they'll find a way to be in your life. That's it. So don't so understand you're going to go through times of just you, and at the end of the day, you can only count on yourself, right? You can't count on others to take care of you. So, if you put it in that sort of perspective, that should make things a little bit clearer. But, you know, here's kind of like an ending statement to that is the fear didn't disappear. My tolerance for self-betrayal did. So, like, do I want to be alone? No. Am I going to be misunderstood? Yes. Am I going to be labeled too much? Who knows? And as far as connection goes, hey, you can connect with other people out there. You know what I mean? Like there's plenty of stuff. So don't worry about it. Again, this is more of a focus on you and your self-worth. Excuse me. It's been a long week. So I'm a little tired this morning, but we're getting through it. So as I close out this episode, it's life without negotiation. Life without negotiation, yourself isn't louder, it's quieter. And the peace that comes from self-respect is something you never want to trade back. So think of that. As I'm saying is, it's all about your self-worth. It's all about your self-respect. It's all about knowing your boundaries, what's going to align with you. And that's what you have to find for yourself. Journal it, do research, ask ChatGPT if you want. I mean, really it's finding out what's going to be best for you. And don't settle for something that's not the best because you deserve that, you know. But I want you to kind of take this last bit into consideration. This isn't about being rigid or becoming rigid. It's about being honest and becoming honest. So, again, if you're honest with yourself as far as what your needs and wants and desires are, hey, get after it. But don't settle for something else just because. You will find that relationship, whether it's a friendship, whether it's a romantic relationship, you will find that within somebody. It's going to take time, but, in the same token, don't sit there and go after the one that meets a quarter of what you're looking for, because then you're going to have three quarters, 75% chaos. And that's not what you want, and being in a relationship should be easy. It should be effortless. You should be able to have those lines of communication open. You shouldn't have to shrink yourself. You shouldn't have to do a lot of these, all of these things that I just kind of went over. So, understand that, there is somebody out there. You just have to find it. And it's going to take you some time. But in the meantime, you're continuing to grow yourself into an unstoppable force and an immovable object. So, and that's ultimately the best thing that you can do is take care of your health, take care of your mind, take care of your spirit, and build all those things up. So when it comes down to it, you don't have any holes, you don't have any weaknesses, and you will come across that person that is gonna understand you. They are gonna see you, and when you do, I tell you, it's a great, great, great feeling. It truly is. It's something that I now didn't know that I needed, but being seen and being understood is absolutely fantastic. So, take that bit of it for you guys on this Sunday, coming into the second full week of January, getting ready to go to the gym, and then I have church with my daughter later on this morning. And we're gonna hang out before we go and drop her back off, and then we get the Pats 8 o'clock tonight. San Diego Chargers. Gonna see what the 14-3 Pats can do. But with that being said, guys, hey, like and subscribe to the channel. I appreciate, love you all. Want you have a great Sunday. Time to get after it. And I got some big news coming up in the next few weeks that I will slowly be touching upon. But till then, enjoy your Sunday. We'll talk to you.